All right, let's talk about something that I think drives a lot of us crazy. Have you ever felt like you're getting dietary whiplash? One day fat is the absolute enemy, the next it's carbs, then it's sugar, and now it's this thing called ultraprocessed food. It is so confusing, and it kind of feels like nutrition science has just completely lost its way. So let's dig into this using a really great article from Dr. Michael Fenster to try and figure out what on earth is going on.
The philosopher Seneca said this ages ago, and it just nails the feeling, doesn't it? This is exactly where so many of us are at. We all want to be healthy, right? But with all these conflicting signals, it feels like we're just sailing in a storm with no map, and every gust of wind just pushes us in another confusing direction. The source article uses this perfect term for it: dietary whiplash. It's that feeling of being jerked from one idea to the next. One minute, you're convinced you need to clear your entire pantry of one type of food, and the next, you're being told to go buy the very thing you just threw out. It is absolutely exhausting, and it happens so fast. So, one week, you're seeing headlines everywhere screaming that the real villain is ultra-processed foods, or UPFs. Stuff made with industrial ingredients you'd never find in your own kitchen. The message is clear. Anything in a package is bad for you, and the evidence they show seems totally convincing. Okay, but just as you start to wrap your head around that, the whole conversation pivots. All of a sudden, it's not about the processing anymore. It's about carbohydrates. The new message is you gotta cut the bread, the pasta, the rice, because that's the real source of all our health problems. And before you can even think about changing your grocery list again, a third, super simple solution pops up. Just eat more protein. Forget all that other complicated stuff. The answer is protein shakes, protein bars, high protein, everything. You see? Total whiplash. So what is actually going on here? Well, to make sense of this mess, the article points us to this incredibly powerful ancient analogy: the story of the blind men and the elephant. And honestly, it is the perfect way to understand why we're getting so many contradictory messages. You've probably heard the story. A group of blind men are asked to describe an elephant. One touches the leg and says, "Oh, an elephant is just like a big tree trunk." Another one feels the tusk and says, "No, no, it's sharp like a spear." A third man grabs the tail and says, "You're both totally wrong. It's like a rope." Now, here's the key. Each man is describing his little piece of the truth with perfect accuracy, but not a single one of them can see the whole elephant. And that is exactly what's happening in nutrition science today. We have different groups of really smart researchers who are basically like those blind men. Each group is studying a different part of our complicated relationship with food. And, just like in the story, they're coming to totally different conclusions. You can really break this whole debate down into two main camps. On one side, you've got the nutrient camp. These guys believe it's all about the components, the protein, the carbs, the fats. But on the other side, you've got the processing camp, and they argue that how a food is made is actually what matters most. Both are touching a real part of the elephant, but just one part. And this is how we get those three big arguments we hear all the time. First, from the processing camp, you hear that UPFs are the core problem. Then you get the pushback from the nutrient camp saying, hey, processing doesn't matter as long as the nutrients are right. And finally, you get an even simpler nutrient argument: just eat more protein and you'll be fine. Each one is a different part of that elephant.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The source article argues that the science itself isn't failing. The individual studies, they're often correct. The real problem is that everyone is so busy arguing about their individual part that nobody is stepping back to see the whole animal.
And that leads us to the absolute heart of the issue. What if all this contradictory advice isn't because the data is wrong? What if it's because the very lens we're using to look at the data, our whole scientific framework, is just outdated? That old framework has a name. It's called the reductionist model. It's the scientific approach of breaking things down into their smallest, most measurable parts to understand them. So when it comes to food, it means we reduce a whole complex meal down to just a list of its nutrients, calories, and chemical compounds. And look, this reductionist model was a superstar in the 20th century. I mean, it helped us discover things like vitamin deficiencies and solve huge problems like scurvy. It worked wonders for diseases of deficiency. But our problems today are totally different. They're diseases of excess, too many calories, too much stimulation. The old tools just aren't working on these new problems. And this is the rest of the elephant. This is everything that reductionism just completely misses. It ignores how some foods are literally designed to make us overeat. It misses how our gut bacteria react or the food environments we live in. It doesn't account for hyperpalatability, the culture of a meal, or the massive profit motives that drive our food system. Food isn't just a pile of chemicals. It's a deeply complex biological and social system.
So if our old way of thinking is the problem, the solution isn't to just argue louder about the details. The real solution is to find a whole new framework, a new road. And that starts by asking a completely different kind of question. Let's break this down. Right now, we are all stuck in a massive traffic jam, and everyone's arguing about which landmark is more important, the protein mountain or the processing river. But what if we're on the wrong road entirely? The source is saying we need to stop yelling about the map and just find a new route altogether. And that brings us to the final, really provocative thought. This new road, it starts with a new question. Instead of trying to find and blame one single villain component, whether it's carbs, fat, or processing, what if we started asking a bigger, more holistic question? How do we start seeing the whole meal, the whole elephant, in all of its beautiful complexity? Now that's the challenge, and maybe, just maybe, the real path out of all this confusion.